Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We are live today in the Terracotta Warriors exhibition here at World Museum, and I'm joined by Fiona Philpott, who's our Director of Exhibitions, who's going to give us a small run-through of the exhibition to let you know what you can expect. So Fiona, this is where visitors will start at the exhibition in front of these two figures here. Would you like to tell us a little bit about these?
Yes, absolutely. These are two of the figures from the first Emperor's mausoleum site. They're absolutely beautiful. We've got a horse breeder and a cavalry horse, but they're just two of more than 180 objects that we're going to have in the exhibition, which range in size from these amazing gold harness fittings for horses to an entire tomb gateway. And we've also got amazing ritual vessels. We've got personal ornaments made from jade and precious stones. We've got all sorts of things in the exhibition, but we've also got some fabulous audiovisual presentations as well. And in fact, the very first thing you'll see when you arrive at the exhibition is an audiovisual presentation about the sights and sounds of China. So we're going to transport you to China and then back in time to begin your exploration of the exhibition.
Great. So this exhibition has been a long time coming for us here at NML. So why don't we let people know a bit about how the exhibition came about and how long we've been working on it here?
Well, we were actually approached by colleagues in China back towards the end of 2015. And since then, we've had about 6 different visits out to China to continue negotiations for the exhibition. And you might ask, well, why Liverpool? Why is this exhibition not being shown in London? But we as a national museum have a worldwide reputation, and I think our Chinese colleagues believe that we were exactly the sort of venue that would be able to stage an exhibition like this. And of course Liverpool is very well known in China. There's so many people who follow LFC, and of course the Beatles are very popular too.
Great. So what we're trying to do with this exhibition is put on obviously of course a blockbuster exhibition for the people here in Liverpool, but it's not just a collection of objects, it's going to be telling a story of ancient China. So if we walk through now, we can talk about what that story is and where that story starts.
Absolutely. We start our story more than 2,500 years ago in the Eastern Zhou dynasty, and it's at a time when China's divided into 148 different kingdoms, and gradually these kingdoms start competing for power with one another, and so it's a period of political upheaval, it's a time of warfare, and so we've tried to give a sense of that in some of the audiovisual presentations that we've commissioned for the exhibition.
So we're stood now in what we call the Warring States period of the exhibition. So this is obviously a time of upheaval for China. What does some of the objects in this exhibition area represent?
Well, here really what we're doing is we're looking at the rise in power of the Qin state, which is sitting on the northwest border of China at the time. And the rulers of the Qin state start to grow in wealth and power and prosperity because they're importing horses from the steppe lands on their border. And of course horses were incredibly important at this time in China's history. They're used obviously for war chariots. Gradually when mounted cavalry is introduced to warfare, then they become increasingly important. And they're the means of communication for most people as well. You've got to travel across the country, you do it by horse.
So should we take a look at some of the objects that illustrate that connection to the horse in ancient China?
Absolutely. We've got some most amazing gold horse fittings here. So the Chinese acquired horses from the nomadic people in Central Asia, and as a result of this were influenced by their taste in horse fittings and horse furniture. So you can see these are tiny gold items that would have been on a horse harness, which would have decorated that horse harness. And if you can see just at the bottom there, we've got 2 tiny gold fittings which actually are designed with a duck head. It's really intricate, the detail on those small pieces. And lower down we've got a number of bronze items which look like rabbits, and they're from the decoration of a chariot.
Beautiful. So here we are at the Warring States. China's at war. So after this period, what happens to ancient China then?
Well, then we learn about more about the Qin state, which was of course home to the first emperor's family, his ancestors. And then we move into the section that deals with the Qin dynasty itself, and we arrive here and we meet the first emperor who unified...
He's the main man of the exhibition.
He is indeed. He's central to the exhibition. And of course he unifies China in 221 BC. So we have an image of him here because he was obviously incredibly powerful, and so this image makes him look very imposing.
So what was he like as an emperor and as a man? Do we know much about him?
Well, of course, we only have histories of the time to tell us what he was like, but he must have been somebody who wielded immense power. He unifies China. He introduces all sorts of government reforms and taxation. He introduces a single language across the country to make it easier, I guess, for people to communicate. He introduces a standardized system of weights and measures and coinage to make it easier for people to trade. So it was an incredibly organised bureaucracy, I guess.
And of course, what he's most famous for is probably his burials. Sorry about that mild blip there. So we're just talking about the first emperor's burial site. So we believe it's the biggest burial site on Earth?
Yeah, 56 square kilometres. It's 200 times bigger than the Valley of the Kings. So it was a mammoth, a massive burial site. And I guess, you know, this guy is the first emperor of China, so it's really important that he has a magnificent burial site because, of course, the ancient Chinese believed that their life on Earth would continue in the afterlife. So you've got to make sure that you've got everything you need for a magnificent afterlife.
And indeed he tried to take a lot of those items with him to the afterlife. So why don't we go and take a look at some of the objects that he buried with him?
Well, I think he's preparing a city-sized kingdom for his afterlife, and so not only does he have the warriors to protect him, but he has all sorts of other items which are going to provide entertainment for him and amusement in the afterlife. So one of the very spectacular pieces we have in the exhibition is this bronze cauldron, which actually comes from a pit with terracotta strongmen and acrobats. So these figures were obviously there to entertain the emperor. And this cauldron weighs 212 kilograms.
Wow.
And we believe that maybe it was designed for the strongmen to lift above their heads to show how strong they really were, and it may have been used as part of their performances in some way. So that really is a most fascinating piece, and you can see all the carvings, can't you, around the edge here, and the face on the legs of this ding cauldron.
I think this might surprise a lot of his visitors, is that it's not just the terracotta army that he buried with him, it is a number of objects, because he didn't just want an army for the afterlife, he wanted a whole array of different things. But
absolutely, yes.
So visitors might have noticed the chariots in the background here, so should we talk a little bit about the chariots?
Well, these represent the chariots that he buried with him. They're the only items of their type to have ever been found in a burial, and they're half-sized models which would have been made entirely from bronze, but they represent the sorts of vehicles that the emperor would have travelled around in, and clearly they're here so that he can continue journeys in the afterlife. But if you look very closely at these figures, again, the horses are beautifully sculpted. They're so immensely detailed. All the harness fittings, and then the painting around the wagon that would have carried the emperor as well. It's really, really fascinating.
Great. So should we take a look at this little bronze goose here? So why did the emperor take a goose with him to the afterlife?
Well, this was one of 46 birds that were actually discovered in one of the pits on the emperor's burial site. And they found these birds along with 15 terracotta musicians, and it's thought that they represent an imperial garden. So the emperor, again, needs to have amusement, and he needs to be able to enjoy and relax in the afterlife. But you can see it's so realistic, isn't it? Even the movement of those, you can see the way his feet are curled under and under his body as if he's swimming in the river. It's absolutely fascinating.
So he took an imperial garden with him to the afterlife.
Well, we think yes, absolutely.
And of course, one of the things he's most famous for was taking an army with him into the afterlife.
Yes.
And here are our blockbuster pieces of the exhibition, which are, of course, the Terracotta Warriors.
Absolutely. The army sits to the east of the Emperor's Mausoleum. So it's the mausoleum, it's the pyramid-shaped structure at the centre of the Emperor's burial site where he was buried. But to the east of that, we have we have 3 pits which contained his army.
And these are 10 authentic figures from the first Emperor's burial site.
Absolutely, yeah. You can see where the figures have been repaired, actually, once they were discovered. What people don't always appreciate is that the figures were in pits which were lined with timber, and they were covered with organic material, and over time the timber and the organic material has collapsed, and so it fell on top of the warriors. And so when they're found in pieces. I mean, some figures have larger pieces than others, but most have been reconstructed. And so far they've uncovered about 2,000 warriors and horses and chariots, but they estimate that there are 8,000 there. So there's quite a lot of work still to be done on the first Emperor's Mausoleum site itself.
Absolutely, and a lot of the warriors that have been found are still quite fragile, and that's why only a certain amount could be let out of China at one particular time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think that they're more than 2,000 years old and they're made from clay, and yes, they were found in pieces, so they have to be very carefully reconstructed. And it's a huge undertaking to transport figures like this, which are so fragile, over 5,000 miles from Xi'an to Liverpool.
Absolutely. So what can you tell us about these warriors? So what a lot of people are interested in is that they're all completely individual, have completely individual features. So can you talk us a little bit about what each of these warriors are, who they are, and what they represent?
Yes, well, we have figures that represent different parts of the army. So the first figure that we have here is a general, and he's actually quite thick set, isn't he? You can see he's wearing his armour. His headdress denotes the fact that he is a general, and originally he would have had his hands, I think, on a sword. So all the warriors at one time carried bronze weapons, which have some of which have since perished, but I think they've recovered more than 40,000 weapons.
Wow.
And they were razor sharp, the weapons originally, and they had never been used, and were probably made especially for burial. But yes, and you can see how the faces of each member of the army are slightly different. You can see here we've got somebody with quite a high forehead and quite a big moustache, and some of them have no facial hair. It's possible that the characters represent different regions of China.
Oh wow! So what's this gentleman with his arms out over here? What kind of warrior would he have been?
Well, he's actually a charioteer. And again, we know that from the position clearly of his arms, but also from his headdress and from the armour that he's wearing. I think what's also fascinating for visitors to know is that these warriors would originally have been brightly painted, and 2 of the warriors that we've got this figure over here who's a heavy infantry man, and the figure over there who's a kneeling archer, and they still have traces of paint on them. You can see very clearly the red paint on the figures.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, after the first emperor is another period of Chinese history, and the rest of the exhibition from here onwards covers almost the legacy of the emperor and Chinese history afterwards.
Yes, it does. The first emperor dies rather unexpectedly in 210 BC. They think he may have died from mercury poisoning, which he was perhaps taking in order to extend his life rather than cut it short. So a bit of an irony there. But when he dies, civil war breaks out. There's a peasant revolt, and eventually a new dynasty emerges and carries on many of the achievements introduced and many of the changes introduced by the first emperor. But the Han dynasty lasts for much longer. It lasts for a period of about 400 years, and it's during this period in Chinese history that we see China grow from strength to strength. There are great advances in science, in technology and medicine, and it's also the period when the Silk Road is established as well.
That's great. So when visitors come here on Friday, they'll be able to carry on from here and discover the rest of Chinese history. And then they'll reach an end of the exhibition, which they might not be expecting. but it's a bit of a blockbuster end. So China's First Emperor and the Terracotta Warriors opens here on Friday at World Museum. We are actually closed tomorrow in order to prepare for the exhibition opening on Friday, but the ticket booth outside will be open. You can buy your tickets online at liverpoolmuseums.org.uk/warriors. And thanks, Fiona, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We hope to see you here. We can't wait for you to see it.